Welcome back to Revving Up with RevEng. I'm Matt Haller and joined as always by my co-host. On this show, we sit down with the builders, operators, and strategists behind the most innovative revenue teams to understand what's working and what's next. Part 2 of our conversation with Sara Archer, the Chief Revenue Officer at ChartMogul, we go deep into the tactical side of growth. Sara walks us through a specific business challenge she and her team tackled and how they approached the problem and the results they achieved. So, Sara, can you take us back to this moment when you were like, something's not right here? What were you noticing? What were you feeling?
I joined ChartMogul back in 2018. And on my second day, the CEO said to me, hey, would you mind just building a forecast model and how onboarding goes? Laptop here, go. And the first thing I think any RevOps hire does is they deep thorough inspection to get the lay of the land. What am I dealing with here? And I cracked open the CRM, had a look through what the team was doing, the data that was available to me. And then embarrassingly, I put together like a 30-slide presentation that was like, no, I can't build you a forecast model, but I can implement a new CRM for you, because fundamentally the business just didn't have the required data needed for me to be able to articulate anything with confidence.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that means? We hear that a lot, right? Where we don't have the data. What did that mean for you? And what was the moment that you said, we got to rebuild?
This is only my first rebuild, but done some more rebuilding since. But when you build a forecast, and forecast means so many different people, right? So the first thing you need to understand is, who is my audience and what are they asking of me, and how that data and confidence. And for me, I opened what we were using at the time, which was Close.io, now just Close CRM. And I wanted to be able to answer questions about how long deals had been in any given stage. And so I want to understand the health of my pipeline and the mechanics of sales and buying journey. I need to understand, how long does something sit in discovery? How long does something sit in evaluation? Where are we most likely to lose deals, and why might that be? And time spent in stage, thing that kind of kicked me off. I was like, without this, I feel a little stuck. And as I dug a bit deeper, the questions I was asking was sort of met with similar missing data points. It was at that time that I said, okay, well, the reporting that I want isn't available. And there were totally workarounds. Like, I could have hooked the CRM up to a Zapier and pushed things into a Google Sheet, and that probably would have worked. But the time was like, hey, let's move the business on to something more robust. And so at that time, I implemented a product called Zendesk Sell, which is never words I thought I would say. Zendesk Sell used to be called Base CRM, and Zendesk acquired them, I don't know when. But ChartMogul is a very technical sale, and our support team and our sales team interface quite a lot, and our business relies very heavily on Zendesk support. And so when I went out to market to see, okay, I could implement HubSpot, I could implement Salesforce, I have lots of familiarity with both of those tools, but I recommended Zendesk Sell because it was really well connected to Zendesk support, and I could then see some more visibility, right? Which is, show me deals stuck in evaluation where number of support tickets is greater than 2, or things like this. My CEO asked me, he said, Sara, well, aren't you just going to implement Salesforce? And I said, sure, I'll implement Salesforce for you, but I need a Salesforce admin because I don't want that job. And we looked at each other and we were like, okay, well, what else shall we do? And so we landed on this, and we used Zendesk Sell with a great deal of success for about 3.5 years.
I mean, that's amazing. And I think what's interesting is you're kind of going against the grain, because everybody would say, just buy Salesforce, just buy HubSpot. And, you can't go wrong with that. But you looked at it and said, it actually makes more sense for us. If I know that I have something that's working, my customer support, and that's so critical to the business, it's important that whatever we're doing from a selling perspective, it at least has the same visibility into what's happening with the customer journey. Because I'm assuming you don't want to be in a renewal conversation with a customer when they're having trouble implementing their charts.
Spot on. And so it was really just the marrying of those teams and that visibility, which sort of led me to selecting Zendesk Sell. And I think reflecting on that decision, it's maybe now a part of my mantra, which is like, there is no playbook. Like, you can't just roll in and implement Salesforce, even though you've done it 40 times over. You need to take a step back and look at the ingredients you have in front of you. And maybe that really means implementing something for a time or a purpose that is not necessarily best in class, but can work for what you need. And when I buy software in general, I quite like to choose as a challenger product or a new to market product where I've got a line of communication to that vision or roadmap. And I'm an important customer to that vendor because I'm not talking to anyone at Salesforce support about the product roadmap. So there are a couple of different avenues to it. But yeah, we used Zendesk Sell for 3.5 years. And then I found myself in a similar moment of, hey, something else is wrong here. And so I can tell you about that if you're interested.
Yeah, take us through that. When did you notice that Zendesk and this, I guess, this challenger approach that you've taken was not going to continue to be the platform for growth?
So over the years, what had happened, and Zendesk Sell is sort of like the first example of that, is we had implemented all of these point-to-point solutions between our backend and like a workflow tool. So think, for example, of like a customer success platform. Some years after Zendesk Sell, we implemented Custify for account management and account health and for our account management team. And there were other examples of this. We were using MailChimp for the newsletter, but Intercom for our in-app messaging, etc.
This sounds like one of those situations where it's like, let's just buy it. Forget about build, buy, partner. It was just buy, buy, buy.
Yeah, you're trying to solve a specific decision in the moment, and you sit down and you write your quarterly plans and you're like, what should we do this quarter? And you're like, we should implement a customer success health platform, but like, should you? Not sure. Yeah, it's our Q3 goal. So buckle up. But what happened was you would look at a customer record in Zendesk Sell and in Custify, you'd see, oh, when was Acme Corporation last active, for example, and both systems would tell you different things. And that was the moment where I was like, this has some far-reaching consequences. The team's not going to trust the data. They're going to become frustrated, disgruntled. Imagine trying to run a marketing campaign and say, hey, we want to target everyone that hasn't been active in 30 days. And you can't even isolate that segment of customers. That's a really disheartening experience for someone. Furthermore, like, what if we go into customer conversations assuming things about account usage and we're wrong? That's going to look poorly on us. Really, it was a result of buying and trying to solve specific problems at specific times. But all of those solutions, they have different rate limits, they have different strengths. And so what had been architected was a bit of Frankenstein's monster, where there wasn't even any documentation about how certain things were documented or built or implemented rather. And so I was lucky enough to be working alongside a really talented revenue operations professional. So Thomas, our head of revenue operations and data analytics, and he and I said, let's take a step back and redesign this.
I'm actually having this conversation with one of our clients about trying to take a step back and blow open the assumptions you have about the way that sales data should operate and align it to the way that your business is. Can you talk about how you went through that process and what kind of trade-offs that you needed to make as you were imagining what that new data model needed to look like?
So I think it starts with questioning the premise that the CRM is the system of truth. I feel like that's a little bit of a lie. It sounds too negative, but we were sold this idea that like the CRM is the source of truth. And I fundamentally don't agree with that anymore. You can make a CRM a source of truth, but I was lucky insofar as like I had a lot of leeway to do things the way I wanted. And I was working with Thomas, who has a computer engineering background and technical skills that really outstrip mine tenfold. And he and I said, okay, why don't we write out all the challenges we have with our revenue data in general and see if we can put together a better solution. And so we were struggling with a couple of things, these like point-to-point integrations that I mentioned. We had just started to really ramp up our marketing hiring, and we had very little idea of where our good leads were coming from. And we also had some data integrity issues, because a ChartMogul user will start a session on their mobile device, then in an incognito browser for their primary company, and then something they're side hustling. And we had a lot of user identity resolution errors. And so we weren't like totally confident that the right messages were going to the right people for a couple of reasons. We whiteboarded out some solutions. We looked at lots of different vendors, and ultimately we decided to rebuild everything on top of Segment and our data warehouse. And so we had a lot more maturity than saying, okay, let's just spin up a CRM and import leads, which at a lot of CRM implementations start like that. But we could really do a whole systems thinking about how everything moved together and was like unified and then trusted.
Going back to what you said at the beginning, if the CRM isn't the source of truth, how do you cobble together the truth? How do you find the truth, and what should be that source of truth to make decisions?
You only need data that is commercially valuable and informed enough from a data perspective to make smart decisions. And so in other businesses, I had spent a lot of time trying to get things perfect or close to perfect to satisfy like a concern that something was like missing or wrong. But it's okay if you're like flying blind on a few things, because whether or not you think you are, right? I don't know if you've seen Chris Walker's stuff about like dark social. So your attribution model of like where your good leads come from, like at best, it's probably 80% right. At best.
Yeah,
but
at
you
best,
have to
yeah.
be okay with that, right? And I think for me, it was like, let's just do what we can. We'll put some error handling in place so that nothing is too far gone, and then we'll run the business from there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I think about it.
It's almost like you're saying that your data in business is never going to be 100%. So you trying to wait for the decisions to be made around that perfect data set, you're going to be waiting a long time. So instead, it's more important to look at what is directionally accurate given what we know, and then be okay and be ready to be agile on the fly.
Yeah, because the alternative is building a revenue operations function that's very high effort, low value. Like me to say, Thomas, I want to make sure all of these fields are filled in for every deal. First off, okay, but I'd rather our revenue operations function be doing something high impact, modeling the impact of a pricing change, suggesting we build another product to make stickier customers or higher ARPA customers. That's what our small team really tries to focus effort on. And this is a big change up from where I started my career, because it was all about everything perfect in Salesforce. And if your opportunities are like overdue in the CRM, yeah, I'm going to nag you about it, but I'm not nagging anyone about a field. If I need that data later, I can go figure it out with AI enrichment or something. So I'm surprisingly laissez-faire about this kind of stuff, just from a leadership point of view.
Yeah. Well, you coined it in a term I haven't heard before, which is, I think what you said, Sarah, was commercially valuable or viable information, right? Like, is this information critical to making a decision that is going to help benefit or not benefit us in a commercial way? Which I think you have to think that way, because you're never going to have perfect information. And just the sheer amount of information content that's being created is just overwhelming. Right. And that's, I think that's a really good insight to have.
Commercially viable comes from people who have worked with CRM implementations on, and they're like, how much data should I migrate? And I'm like, only migrate the data that's commercially valuable, because I can scope hours into your CRM migration where I clean up your data from 5 years ago. But guess what? Those contacts don't work at those companies in most cases. And so we'll save that all down somewhere in a file. Maybe you'll have to access it once for a GDPR deletion request. It's like a trust, and people are like a little bit nervous, right? But you can do both things. You can save the data and then only put the good stuff in your new systems.
I've been entangled in those conversations and seen leaders say both migrate everything to throw up their hands and say, let's just start over. And obviously neither one of those extremes is a good answer. And so, having the idea or the concept, or is it commercially viable information, I think will help a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
What I think is hard is someone's got to be the traffic cop, because someone's got to decide, here's what is the minimum commercially viable set of data. And the problem is always commercially viable for who? Because the person who's running SDRs is going to have their own set of minimally commercially viable data. Sales and customer success will be different. And I think where it sounds like ChartMogul is almost in a blessed position is your background, Sarah, is I built a lot of CRM systems before. I've helped companies through this journey. And now I'm in a better position to be able to advise the company we're building on how we do that. If a company doesn't have somebody who's been in the trenches and has seen all the good, the bad, and the ugly on the CRM front, do you have a recommendation on how they think about driving that alignment and really defining on what is the most important data points to measure?
To your point, it's okay, different teams need different data points to do their job effectively, but what data do you need to serve up the most meaningful interaction for the customer. That's like how I would challenge a little bit. So like, do I need to track marketing email campaign opens and clicks? Does that help me provide a better experience in ChartMogul, the product for my customers? Probably not. And that would be my first thought there.
And when you do that, then all of a sudden you go into the CRM system and all you see is just a list of all the times somebody opened an email. And that's not helpful in figuring out the last conversation you had with somebody.
No, rather it's harmful, right? Because if you flood a system with noise, then you have no idea what signals to pay attention to. But automations can be helpful there. If you have a really full picture of something, then you can also train Slack, or we use a product called N8N. It's like a souped up version of Zapier or Pipedream with some JavaScript on top. And then you can do some alerting to say, hey, pay attention to this.
As I hear you say that, one of the things that I find so interesting about the world of RevOps and how much it's changed over the last, definitely 10 years, but even the last like 3 or 4, it feels like a lot of these jobs are more like you're part product manager, you're part developer, you're part finance, you're part seller. And it's so hard to find people who can have a little bit of all of that and do it well.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I was talking to a customer of mine yesterday who's hiring their second RevOps hire. And she was like, hey, would you give me some guidance about this? And she was like, I'm thinking someone to manage the CRM and a couple of other things. And I was like, okay, cool. Maybe that's the right answer, is to go hire a CRM admin. But what I would challenge you to do is to hire someone with ambitions to work on whatever it is are high impact revenue operations at your business. And maybe that's pricing strategy, or maybe that's something around, I don't know, SaaS metrics or partner marketing. I don't know. There's like any number of things. And so if you shoebox it like too hard, then I think you can limit yourselves of finding these levers that could make a difference with your long-term growth.
What does someone do, or what do they study if they want to get into RevOps? Last time I checked, it wasn't something you study in college. There's like I will go in to get my business degree with a RevOps minor, right, and a sales major, right? Like those things just don't exist. But it's, as Matt said, it is a growing field. We're seeing tons of people in our networks interested in it. And yeah, just curious, what does someone do to prepare for a career in RevOps?
Yeah, some people get into RevOps because the aspects of sales that are really hard or uncomfortable, like are turn off, right? So owning a quota, like having variable compensation. So some people get into RevOps because they're like, I like problem solving, but take some of these other variables out, where they tend to be like builders. So some of the most successful RevOps people I've worked with this is unfortunate that you can't like peek over someone's desk and look at the way they're doing something and say, hey, I have an idea that might make your life easier. That was the benefit of all being in office. And so when I sold Salesforce implementations, a pretty common practice in consulting would be to do time studies. So you would sit behind someone's desk and you would time how long it would take for them to log a case in Zendesk or do XYZ. And then that's how you do your scope of work, and you do your pricing, and you would say, you have 40 customer support managers and on average it takes them XYZ. And so I can save you this much through automation. And so I would say like that building, no matter where you are. And I've seen RevOps people do it in their personal lives, where like Pat Dennis, who I used to work with, whipped out his phone and he was like, there's an automations feature on the iPhone, right? He was like, look at how I built this automation to organize my email inbox better. And so I think some people are just like, they're just naturally drawn towards it.
Yeah.
I have my Alexa set up so that if I program my meals for the week, it like auto populates my grocery list, which sends to my husband, who then doesn't have to ask me, do we have ketchup? So I don't know.
I feel like RevOps people, they're always a little bit neurotic, right? Like really what's driving us is a need to organize everything.
Yeah. If I
and then also make the hunt do his job.
If I could be like a personal organizer, I could come to your house and reorganize your cupboards. Like maybe that's my retirement plan.
That's funny. We need to take a quick break because we need to come back and do our last segment of this show, some predictions. So make sure the husband gets the ketchup, and we'll be right back.
And mustard.
Welcome back to Revving Up. We are back with some predictions. So my first question for our guest, Sara, the Chief Revenue Officer of ChartMogul, is what do you see as some of the leading trends and predictions in the B2B SaaS and AI markets in the next 12 to 18 months?
I might go with consolidation. I don't think that sales and revenue operations teams need more technology. They rather need a deeper understanding of their customers, which I think AI will totally enable, right? But it's just not the case that in most businesses, something like a deal room or a mutual action plan software is like really adding all that much to the buyer seller conversation. And we've already seen some of these businesses start to disappear. And I think that might be accelerated by AI because you can just get to these insights faster by using some of the technology that's out there. Not to be like a defeatist or be too negative, but I think actually some of the tools in market that have been built for sales and marketing teams will actually disappear.
One of the things we talked about a lot is that the idea of what that digital experience for the rep is going to change, right? Historically, it was what fields do you need to surface? But in reality, AI should be surfacing the right fields for the right rep at the right time so that we're facilitating a better customer experience and outcome. And to your point, it's almost like we got away from what it takes to actually just serve, sell, and support customers because we were focused on implementing the right tool. But no tool is going to help you better understand or support what your customers need.
Yeah, fair point.
Okay, with that, want to thank you very much for joining us on another episode of Revving Up with RevEng. We are going to be back next week for an all-new conversation with another revenue leader, so stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you very much.